Anyway, thank you so much for joining today. Today's guest is Albena Azmanova, and she is the author of Capitalism on Edge: How Fighting Precarity Can Achieve Radical Change Without Crisis or Utopia. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan.
For a moment, but you're back. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. You're also, and this is a very unusual term to hear in America, you are a reader of social and political thought at the University of Kent, which I think means you're a professor, right?
Right. Yeah. It's very, very strange British terms.
Very
they stick to those old labels.
Yeah.
So I can read finally.
Well done. So, but where are we talking to? It's getting dark there. Yeah,
I'm in Brussels, Belgium, and I'm very happy to be virtually in LA.
Yeah, well, it is. It's beautiful and warm here, and summer has arrived, and I'm already picking my tomatoes, not to gloat, from my garden. So
I only have wild strawberries on my terrace.
So, well, really, thank you so much for joining. This came about, as I was saying earlier, we've been doing a series of salons with Better.com with Vishal Garg, who's the CEO there. And the topic has been reimagining the American dream and, getting that American dream, getting your home and your car and the front yard and the picket fence is hard. And it's been getting harder and harder. And we had this idea before the pandemic started, and now obviously things are getting more precarious for many people. So, it's very hard to imagine how to pay next month's rent or mortgage, I think, for so many people. But I thought a great way maybe to start is this word precarity, which I've been tossing around for the last week or two. But I think it would be really good if you could define it for us, because it's the sort of word we might see and not entirely know what it means.
Right. It's curious that it's actually a new word in the English language.
I know. It hasn't been.
But 10 years ago, it did not exist. We would talk about precariousness of human life, of our fragility as human beings, our mortality. We are exposed to, the elements of nature, but that's not it. Nowadays we speak about precarity, and I deliberately use this not very elegant new word. And people often ask me, well, why don't you just say precariousness? Exactly because I want to stress that it's a new phenomenon.
Right.
And precarity by this, the fragility of society, that we have become unable to defend ourselves against a virus. Well, usually, if we were a strong society with good healthcare, we would be able to fight the virus and not be in such a desperate situation now, because the step from a contamination to a pandemic is purely political, is the incapacity of a society to cope with that problem. So, that it's a social condition of fragility, insecurity. So there are a lot of things accumulating to make us all socially precarious. Economic insecurity. Our jobs are less and less secure. Even those of us who have a nice job, I have a wonderful job as a professor, a neat salary, but there are more and more pressures, let's say, to apply for funds and bring in funds rather than do my research and my teaching. More of these people whom we even envy with the good jobs and nice salaries, they feel they can never take a vacation because of all these pressures to be in the always-on economy.
Right. Always working, always making money.
You cannot. At the same time, people value free time, people value me time, people value family time. And yet that insecurity that you don't know what the next will be on your job makes you, work more, gain even more than you would normally go for under this pressures of job and income insecurity. So what I mean, deliberately choosing to choose this new term is to indicate this novel condition of our societies. Yeah.
Okay. You grew up in communist Bulgaria, is that right? So I'm wondering, do you have an issue with inequality or no?
Okay. So I was born in 1968. So all my youth was under the old regime, the state socialism, which was a rather stable society, right? We had a free education, free healthcare, was rather equal. Yeah? And people did not complain about that. So there was a lot of, it was the opposite of precarity. It was stable and safe.
Yeah.
Well, but I actually joined the dissident committee. I became a dissident fighting against the regime. However, what we fought against was the political oppression, not the economic model. So we were not hungry for capitalism. We wanted more free, liberal communism. So that was the issue. And maybe indeed my disagreement now, my criticism of inequality, of our preoccupation, our obsession with inequality, is fed by those intuitions I developed growing up under communism, seeing that you could be very, very well living with much less,
right,
more stable, more simple lives, but with more political freedom. So that would, for me, be the ideal life. Simple, free political freedoms and stable economic existence.
I mean, inequality is one thing, but unfairness is sort of something else, right? You know,
So,
you expect some people to be far wealthier than you. I expect the Silicon Valley billionaires to be that, and I'm never going to be that, and I'm okay with it. But you're not okay with.
People don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
You know, when I started writing this book, about 10 years ago, and I remember how shocked I was by one statement. The economist Robert Shiller was getting the Nobel Prize for economics in 2013, and he declared that rising inequality in the United States and elsewhere in the world is the most important problem faced by society. And then I said to myself, oh, when did we fix poverty? Because poverty and inequality are logically different things.
Right.
So fighting economic inequality has become celebrity politics, not only on the left, also on the right.
Right.
Joseph Stiglitz, Paul Krugman, Thomas Piketty very prominently now, but even on the right, Christine Lagarde, when she was IMF boss and now the European Bank, she's saying with all this inequality, we don't have enough consumption. This is bad for capitalism.
I spoke to Angus Deaton and Ann Case, I don't know, a couple of months ago, and with their book, Deaths of Despair, I think they felt more that inequality is to be expected. People sort of accept it, but the unfairness, maybe because most of us who are watching, certainly myself who's speaking to you, I don't have a great history myself. I know you're not an economist, but you could give us a little bit of a brief overview, which I know is in your book, of the 4 stages of capitalism.
You want to hear about the 4 stages of capitalism anytime.
Briefly, so that we know where we are. And your timing, it seems to be pretty impeccable with the book coming out. So well done.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, the book came out in January.
Yeah.
And I was saying this massive precarity is the real concern, not the inequality.
And with the pandemic, of course, the precarity.
And then the pandemic hits, and it makes this very clear because we cannot cope because we're so, there is no sufficient investment in healthcare.
Right.
It is not about, of course, within this precarity, there's a lot of inequality within that.
Yeah.
Right. But even if imagine that we all become completely equal, Just imagine that we tax the rich out of existence, we become all equal. That is not going to give the sufficient funding for the healthcare and education and culture that we need in order to be, healthy societies. So nobody would be rich enough to sponsor their own excellent educational system or educational public healthcare. So you asked me about the 4 stages of capitalism. So capitalism as a social system, as a way of producing our life, consuming, producing, living our lives, was established in the 19th century. It started developing earlier, but that's the first model that was established in the 19th century. It was based on individual initiative. That's why we call it liberal capitalism, based on entrepreneurship. And that model, that was it completely left to the market and to individual initiative and individual risk to deliver growth, to deliver the goods. This model came into crisis at the end of the 19th century because there was just so much risk accumulated to the working classes. You have seen the movie Modern Times, Charlie Chaplin's movies. That was the typical, horrible capitalism of the 19th century that wrecked the life of the majority of workers. So because it created so much risk to the working classes, child labor, terrible working conditions, the whole society was in crisis. But also the whole society jumped to do something about it. There's this splendid little book by Karl Polanyi about the transformation of overcoming the 19th century model and creating what came to be known as the welfare state, and with the New Deal in the US.
So post.
That's the second model.
Yeah, or Second World War.
Yeah, but the interesting part there is that it was not because the working classes only wanted more protection. Even the Catholic Church, the center left, the center right, the Catholic Church, all major social forces came together and said, enough is enough. We need social protection. We need public services. Some of the important sectors of the economy need to be in public hands in order to ensure that we're not just chasing short-term profits. So that was the second model of the welfare state. And sometime in the late 70s, early 80s, the important decision makers decided that that's no good. It's too long to say why, and there are different versions of why. But we switched then to the infamous neoliberal state. That is, it said in order to become more competitive in the global economy and to deliver faster growth, we need to liberalize those. The state needs to withdraw from the economy and let the market decide where to allocate its energies and how to deliver happiness.
So about maximizing profits that day, very quickly.
So we're back to maximizing profits and this economic logic in all spheres of life.
Shareholder value that day, not really long-term minded.
Right. Yeah. And of course you can achieve a lot of things with that, but then you prioritize, you put your energies in one direction. And that lasted until the end of the century. So about 10 years before the economic crisis, before the financial breakdown of 2007, things started to change. And then I claim that we transitioned to the fourth model, which I call precarity capitalism. Now, there the state, why is it a new model of capitalism? Because the state behaves differently vis-a-vis society. So it is not hands-off policy, it's not back to markets. It is more like the state handpicks specific economic actors, specific companies, let's say Apple or Qualcomm, and helps them in order to become more competitive in the global economy. Because the main idea at the time, the main policy priority, is to ensure the national competitiveness in the globally integrated markets. So once this becomes your policy priority, you start helping individual capitalists, not the whole capitalist system, which is based on competition, right?
That becomes a 0.0001%, which is not what we have, right? I mean, it's
right. So one of the drivers of this story is automation, IT development. That allowed a lot of people to reach these global markets and to maximize their profit. Unless it is an extraction from rent because there is no competition. But just as these huge markets, of course, multiply the profit because you can sell to more people. So the whole game changed around the turn of the century. But one of the outcomes of that is this massive economic insecurity for everybody, because you have only a handpicked companies for which huge profits are secured because there's basically no competition. Apple doesn't have real competition. Facebook doesn't have real competition.
The fangs, yeah.
Right. But for the rest, the rat race is intensified for everybody else. So my concern is not so much with how much wealth these 1% or 0.1% have, but as a consequence of them sitting on the top comfortably, the competition for everybody else is unbearable. So whether you are a worker or an owner of capital, the pressures are enormous.
Yeah.
I
have a question. So, we described precarity earlier. And, as I was reading up, there's also a new word, the precariat, a social class.
Yes.
Which I love that new word, defined by lack of stability and predictability in their professional lives. Could you, because I think we're going to see this word being, thrown around and used much more. Could you tell us who makes up that group? I mean, just as you were speaking, obviously it might include the gig workers, right?
So the term was coined by this wonderful economist and sociologist, Guy Standing. And he means by them basically the underdog, the most precarious, the poor, the impoverished and insecure labor, of very often migrant labor, of without zero contact hours.
What about gig economy folks?
Excuse me?
What about folks from the gig economy?
The gig economy, but to be part of the precariat, you need to be poor.
Right.
While I'm saying we need to consider the precariat, it's like the new proletariat.
Right.
Within the general picture of the precarization of the whole society. Because curiously, a lot of social scientists would tell us that the global economy is splitting people into losers and winners from globalization, right? So the losers are those who are mobilizing against the elites now and the populism. These are the losers of globalization because they have less money and less security, so less opportunity. But what unites currently both the winners and the losers is that the game they're playing, chasing more and more, less and less secure jobs in a increasingly precarious world. So both the winners and the losers overall are losers of that game. And we have never been in the history, at least of the West, to such a point when even for the winners, the price of winning is too high. And it is no longer interesting to win. Of course, you have to play to win. Otherwise, well, you're on the side of the losers, and this is worse. But being in the game comes at a very high price. Poor mental health,
addiction, opioid,
you never see your kids. That's why the suicides among the rich and the well-employed are on the increase. This is because of these pressures. So winning comes at too high a price. That's why there is this, I'm observing this, whether people admit it or not, but because the common engine of all this is the competitive production of profit, which is exactly what capitalism is. So whether you give it that label or not, but there is a unprecedented possibility to mobilize rich and poor, men and women, well-educated, non-educated, a massive wave against capitalism, just like it happened in the early 20th century. When we switched from the liberal to the capitalism to the welfare capitalism.
I have a question here from Vishal, who emailed it to me. So I'm gonna read this. He's sending me notes privately. Is inequality more politically correct rather than solving poverty? Is it because those with political power, say the upper middle class and middle class professionals, are more interested in upward mobility than in creating downward safety nets? That is, looking after themselves and bringing up, because the poor are disposable, easily replaceable via immigration.
I think it's a perfect formulation of my disagreement with our obsession with inequality. Exactly. Okay. It is a very much upper middle class concern, because the poor are really concerned with their poverty. They're
concerned with their next meal, really, right? I mean, it's
right.
Like, yeah.
But see, the injustice, as the philosopher Harry Frankfurt, he published a book on inequality about 5 years ago, and there it really struck me, this formulation that the poor suffer because they don't have enough, not because others have more or some have far too much. So indeed, it is a very middle class, upper middle class concern with upward mobility. Also, there are a lot of fallacies in this obsession with inequality. One of those is that if you think, when we talk about redistribution, we remain in this logic of comparing individuals and the groups to which these individuals belong. And this is somehow presented as a radical. But first of all, even Karl Marx did not prescribe equality as the feature of communism. The redistribution formula is to each according to their need. That's not equality, right? So it's not, but then socialism has always been about the public good. It's not about individual equality among individuals. So this is not even socialist. It sounds very radical, but it's not even socialist. So that's the paradox. And that is why when listening to these paradoxes, I thought that maybe the language of frustration with inequality is expressing, in fact, some new concern. And gradually I discovered that this concern, as I was searching for it, was precarity. But I have a term about a favorite term about that fallacy that the left, but also the right, falls into when they protest. And I call that the paradox of emancipation. Because see, paradox of emancipation. So we want to emancipate people from exclusion and inequality. But when you claim that you want to enter into something and be equal into that thing, you're actually glorifying that thing. So to be equal in a precarious society, would deepen the injustice of that precarity. While you're fixing one little problem, you aggravate or you're blind to the bigger problem.
Where does college education come into this for you?
Where is this college education?
I mean, there's this feeling that in America you won't get any. I'm speaking of America, not Europe. If you don't have a college education in America, you're never going to be able to move on up.
Well, studies confirm that. Most studies confirm that that for upward. But college education, first of all, should be part of the good life.
Right.
Okay. First, it should be part of the good life. We should not instrumentalize it that it is about upward mobility.
Right. So similar to healthcare, it should be available.
The healthcare should be available to all. And I mean, it is not a very radical idea. Look at Europe. Europe has excellent education. The tuition of my son at Oxford cost a scandalous £10,000.
I was just about to say there's a certain reason why so many Americans go to Oxford, Cambridge, and St. Andrews and Edinburgh.
Right.
Because it is,
you can provide good education. And see where is one of the top attempts to develop vaccine in Europe? It's at Oxford.
Right. Yeah.
It's your publicly funded public entity, not for profit.
How can governments fight precarity?
Okay, I have a full chapter. The last chapter of my book is on that. So I'm not going to disclose everything, but okay. So there are two strands of precarity. So there is the social precarity, and then there is the individual precarity of people. The social precarity, clearly, you need to invest in long-term science, education, public healthcare, culture. So back to robust public sector. But individual precarity in our times of automation, robotization, IT, all that is taking away jobs and good riddance. I mean, it's great that we can produce our life through machines. The problem is, and those are the contradictions of contemporary capitalism, is that we are made to rely more on jobs that are disappearing. So those jobs that are disappearing are our exclusive source of income. So how to resolve that is, so universal basic income is one solution, but I would not prioritize universal basic income if we don't have enough funds for a robust public sector. So public sector comes first. Universal basic income is a good solution against the disappearing jobs, but also job sharing.
What do you mean by that?
Look at, there are people who can never leave their job because of insecurity, because they don't know how much they need more to work in order to pay for their health care. Right? In the book, I quote some studies of millionaires who are, most of them are declaring that they would quit the rat race immediately if they were not so concerned about the future. On the other hand, we have a 20% unemployment, youth unemployment in Spain. But so those who can never enter,
is it going to soon be much larger in Spain?
Right, and soon to be much larger.
Much higher.
So there are those people who can never enter the labor market, and those people who can never exit the labor market. How, and that is the common engine
for people to get in. Right, there's no wiggle.
Right. So there are ways to make sure that jobs are, that the time spent in employment is less, but access to employment is open to everybody. France, up to a point, had a 35 hours working week. They started relaxing that. But there are ways to legislate.
Can you imagine Americans going for a 35-hour working week? I mean, Americans, certainly in Silicon Valley, love to brag about working 100 hours a week.
And taking drugs to keep them awake.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Vishal asks, what is the benefit for a leader in the government to fight precarity? I mean, what's in it for them? Why should they?
Look, a lot of the political parties have made, in one way or another, pledge to save the environment. right? So environmental justice is looming large, but you cannot really live up to that promise if you wed it to the idea of growth and redistribution.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we square environmental justice or save the environment and do something for people?
Right.
Social justice and environmental justice by dropping the idea about growth and redistribution and stabilizing people's lives instead. So that would be the incentive for a politician to say, I can deliver what I've promised, save the environment, and make everybody's lives a little better. You know, if we focus on this, economic stability.
Mm-hmm.
So the politicians would be more plausible if they would do that.
As you know, I'm in California, and we've run out of money here in the state. So, I mean, can a liberal vision really be durable in a state such as California, where we have a huge budget shortage? I mean, we already had one before, and now 3 months into a pandemic, we have no money. And how can we can't provide services are already being shrunk so significantly? I'm in LA, and things are being cut, education and police and etc.
At the same time, the government is throwing money at people. It's
Right.
just sending checks to everybody.
Sending out
right.
checks. Yeah.
But that shows you that there are resources. There are resources. It's a matter of choice whether you give these checks. It's by basically buying elections to people, or you invest in research and healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, exactly what the governments are doing now are showing that there are resources. Remember 10 years ago when they were saving the banks, there were resources for that. So the governments have the power of providing the resources they need. It's a matter of political will. I'm very, very convinced about that.
Vishal asked another question. Can it be mandated? I think this is in terms of job sharing. What do you think of job sharing being mandated once you reach the age of 50? I love this. Work sharing, apprenticeship 2.0.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because we all have so much to learn for each other. And again, in Silicon Valley and in many parts of America, once you're like over 32, you're over
Absolutely.
the hill.
Early retirement, but also apprenticeship, job sharing.
Yeah.
Mandated. Look, the subtitle of my book is A Radical Change Without a Revolution, Utopia and Crisis. So indeed, if you look at the biggest achievements of humanity, take, due process, equality before the law. In 1215, this was an idea of the elites. It was not a, democracy that gave us human rights.
Right.
So the important thing is that it became part of the law, and no democratic parliament can go against that.
Right.
So once we decide what our priorities and elites under the pressure of enlightened publics put them into the law, this is the way to go. Actually, this is happening now in the European Union with the European Green Agenda. It is an agenda pushed by the European Commission, which is a non-democratically elected institution.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, maybe if you put it on democratic vote, I'm not sure that, I cannot be sure that all these people who are depending for their everyday survival on jobs that are polluting the environment would vote for that Green Deal.
Mm-hmm. What do you think we have to be optimistic about right now?
Oh, you got me there. Yes, we can be optimistic about
Tuesday. It's always a hard day in the week. Tuesday.
Look, our Western societies are in fact very affluent. But as one great economist said already in 1958, in the book, John Kenneth Galbraith, in the book, The Affluent Society, he said, we are privately rich and publicly poor. We're still our Western societies are privately very rich. We can take care of poverty and we can all live with much less.
That's for sure, right?
Yeah. So that is the good news from me.
Yeah, well, we all have many things thrown at us every day to want more as well, for sure. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We will, yeah, I really, really appreciate it. We'll put up a link to where to buy your book. Do you have a recommendation in the US? Should we do it straight from the publisher or from Amazon, or do you have a preference?
Well, from the publisher, you can have it with 30% off.
That's very nice. That will be 30% of money we could
right.
save.
But it is relatively cheap, and it's a small book. And I keep hearing that it's an easy read.
It's an easy read. That's
what I give that I've put things very simply in it.
Oh, that makes it very appealing, I'm sure, for many of us. So thank you so much. What have you got coming up this weekend that you're looking forward to? Are things locked down? Not so much where you are.
Not
right?
anymore. We can go out. I'm looking forward to a wonderful walk in town. I'm a city girl, and I love taking walks in town.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. Bye. Take care.
You, Susan.
Thank
Bye.
you. Yeah, well, that was so great. Thank you for joining us. And tomorrow, the topic is songwriting your way to the Grammys. So I'm going to have two friends who are here in LA and who work in the music industry, and one who is an agent and one who is a songwriter. And so we will talk about, the music industry, and I hope you can join us. Thank you. Bye.